Morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be talking this morning with Alisa Griffis, who has written a very interesting book called The Power of Three: Managing Life in a Hectic World. I was thinking to myself on the drive over here, we were caught in traffic. And I was thinking to myself, absolutely, hectic is a word that has become overused, but it is a very true phrase. Whenever somebody says to me these days, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? How are you? I'm afraid my first words are, oh, it has been so busy. It has been so hectic. So I really resonate with what you are trying to help us with here today. Alisa, it would be great if you could start us off by giving us some idea of how you came to write the book.
No, I started writing the book when I got a letter from a student at Indiana Wesleyan University, where I teach, who had told me all of these various things that she was doing, and she said, I'm sorry that my assignments are going to be late. I'm actually in the hospital. They think I'm having a heart attack. And I read the list of everything that she was doing, and I wrote back and I said, now, I'm not a doctor of medicine, obviously, but I'm going to guarantee you that your diagnosis is going to be anxiety. And it was. She was not having a heart attack. So I started looking around at other people who were overburdened, and being a type of person who tends to overburden herself as well, I started asking people and doing some interviews and came up with the concept of a life management number, that there's actually certain things that we can't all do at the same time.
How did you get to the magic number of 3? And talk a bit about, I read in your book that you give certain weighting to different kinds of activities and things, and that might help us get a sense of why 3 and how we all might be able to think about our lives and come down to a number that would be manageable.
I tried a whole bunch of different numbers and concepts, and as I spoke to people who were very well balanced in their lives, who were not talking about their stress and how upset they were on a regular basis, and who had accomplished a great deal of things, it turned out that the majority of them were never doing more than 3 or 4 things at the same time. So they had their careers, they had 1 or 2 other things in addition to that. Or if they weren't working in a traditional sense, they were staying at home with their children and they were doing a few activities there. But the people who started to be in the 5, 6, and 7 range, they were not happy. They were crazy, and they experienced more health challenges, and they were wrinkling up faster, and they were, it wasn't good.
Do you think some things, you talk a little bit about some of the really rather burdensome experiences. I mean, some of us, you have 3 children yourself at home, some are caregivers, some individuals have responsibilities that perhaps take up a great deal of their time. How did you and how do you think in terms of being able to decide what you must keep and what it is that you might be able to move off your plate, so to speak?
I suggest that people audit what they're doing and start keeping a list of all of their various activities for a while and start looking at it. There are things that we jump up and down and we volunteer to do that we don't necessarily have to do at that moment. Sometimes another person would be a better person for it. And we also have to look at what I call time zappers. Those are those little things that take 15, 20, 30 minutes that we didn't expect or more.
Can you give us some example of those?
Our water heater broke. The laundry room and the garage were completely flooded. And that was a time zapper. I hadn't anticipated it breaking, and it took extra time out of my day. And one of those, once in a while, is not that big of a deal, but when it starts happening regularly, some of the things that are out of our control or some of the things that are within our control, maybe it's a lack of planning. Mm-hmm. So we can plan to reduce certain things. I figured, okay, every single one of us has the same 7 days a week, the same 24 hours a day. We figure maybe 12 hours of each day is going to be sleeping and performing basic life functions, which leaves us another about 12 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And if we multiplied that out, that's maybe 84 hours left in a week. And yet, let's subtract down from that. Let's figure another 14 hours or so is used up with either exercise or doing things that we need to do for ourselves, or certain other functions, eating. And then that leaves about maybe 70 hours left.
Okay.
And so what do we do with those 70 hours to be productive? If we're doing too many things all at once, that turns into we do nothing well. We do many things halfway. And it tends to make us feel split, like we're juggling too many balls and they're going to start dropping. And we make commitments to people that we cannot follow through on. And so I discovered that if we pick the 3 top things and then stick and do those well, we can be very productive and get a lot of things done. But we just have to understand that there's seasons. For example, I really, really want to learn to play the piano. I am turning 49 in January. I do not play the piano. And I've decided that when my last child finally flies the coop, and that will be August, one went out 2 weeks ago on her 20th birthday, but she moved 9/10 of a mile away around the corner. So I'm okay with it. And then one is in college, and he's actually moving to finish his college. He's moving to Long Beach to finish. And then another one's going to an away school in August. And I've decided when the last kid flies, I'm going to take 10 years of piano lessons. That'll be one of my things that I do. But I have to wait, because to add it in now would be too much. And I wouldn't be able to give my family, who's still hanging around, the benefit of my time.
You talk in the book about the necessity to learn how to say no. And if I think about my own life and my own experiences, and I think about my co-workers and their experiences, that can be tricky. You have some good advice for people. Would you like to take us through how it is that you can say no effectively?
One thing is to remember, if anybody hears it in sales, that when we ask the final closing question, we close our mouths. We don't speak. So if we're saying no, we could say something like, I'd really love to do that, but I don't have the time in my calendar. And then just don't speak. Because the rule in sales is the last person to speak loses. And if we speak again, we're going to end up doing that thing. So we just say no and wait. What's interesting is most people will take that no on the first time. Then there's the people who do the Chinese water torture drip treatment. They're going to just nag at you and keep pecking and dragging and trying to get the person to commit. In which case we can say, I'd really like to do it, but it is impossible at this time. And just leave it. In the book, I give a whole bunch of different options on how to say no, because some things feel more comfortable for some people than others. And for people who are used to saying yes to a lot of things, sometimes it takes some practice.
I can hear myself continuing to either apologize or to offer other ways to get it done. I'm likely to say, look, I really can't do this right now, but perhaps I could do it next week. And I hear that hasn't helped at all.
No.
So I like your suggestion a whole lot. What about if it turns out that it's your boss you're saying no to? Can you give me some, I think it could help to close the lips, but I've got a pretty smart boss, and I have a sense that he might find a way to come back. So could you give us some ideas about when you are talking with people who have some power and influence and who may not take a no quite so easily?
First, we have to decide how many hours we have in our work week that we're expending towards work. And it is possible that if the boss is asking for something that is somewhat reasonable, that we can shunt down the other things and do that thing. I'm not big on saying no at work. However, with that said, if there's a huge project that they're expecting immediately, there are polite ways to say, this might take a team effort. And then close the mouth. The key is putting it back so that they have to consider that there are other options than them just giving it to you. There are a few of us who are very, very productive. And we tend to work at the rate of 3 or 4 people. And so people know that, and those are their go-to people, and they load them up and load them up and load them up until that person can't handle anymore. And when they break, it's usually in a fiery ball of explosion. And so we don't want that to happen. So the key is, if you are that person, if you are that highly effective, efficient, rapid, productive person, then you got to know when to say, I think this might need a team effort.
What about, I'm just imagining what would happen in my case, what about if the boss then says, that's a great idea, Margaret, why don't you go ahead and get the team together?
This actually happened to me recently, and I said, I would just love to do that, but I think somebody else should.
I love it. Alisa, what about, because I'm also sensitive, I am a boss, and I sometimes, because I have, I sometimes find myself doing 23 things at once.
Yes.
I, without realizing it, find that I'm perhaps expecting other people to do 23 things at once. So what advice might you have for me in order that I don't overload those who are responsible to bring projects to me? Because sometimes I feel perhaps I'm creating their problems for them.
Wise leadership is very challenging. We have to know the capacity of each one of our individuals who works for us. And we also have to be able to manage our tasks ourselves and delegate appropriately. One thing is just asking people, is this going to be too much? People will go the extra mile to get things done, but I have discovered that if we overload somebody too much at work, it tends to come out in their personal lives, and then it comes back. It's like a boomerang effect, and it swings back at work. So I'm a boss too. I am a lead teacher at my school, and I have other teachers who report to me and whom I work with. And my job is to not make their lives burdensome. My job is to say, how can I come alongside and support you in such a way that you can get this done? Interestingly, they always just go and get it done. But it is hard to, it's a balancing act.
I'm hearing you say be aware, kind of be in the moment for other people that you are noticing what's happening
yes,
to them.
and I try not to make my emergency their emergency.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I try to plan ahead and know what's coming. If as a boss person, if I don't know what's heading down the pike, maybe that was my responsibility.
Right. Can you give us any examples of how you noticed that? I think it's very insightful. I'd like to know when it would be happening. Sometimes I think I'd notice it maybe after the fact, but
You mean what's coming up?
Yeah, no, when you notice that you perhaps have overloaded somebody else and you don't want to let that become a big crisis.
Mm-hmm. We can see if their face is looking stressed and they're very uncomfortable or unhappy looking.
Yeah.
People who are open generally aren't overloaded.
So saying no is one way to help pare down. Mm-hmm. What about if a person has many, many different kinds of a different variety of things that they're involved in? Some work, some sports, some looking after children and so forth. How do you deal with the huge variety of things? So it's not so much that there are only one or two time demands on you, but that you have so many, you don't know quite where to start.
Right. A very good friend of mine, Philip Lindsay, said to me, Alisa, what is the purpose of life? And for 6 months, I kept coming back and giving him potential purposes, and every time he said, no, that's not it, try again. And I finally said, I'm stupid, tell me. And he said it is to fulfill your highest potentials. Not every potential. We all have some low potentials as well that we wouldn't want to go to, but it's to fulfill our highest potentials. And so we have to ask ourselves, in the season of life in which I am living right now, what are my highest potentials? And then we pick those. And that means that there are some things that we have to put to the side and wait for. And for some things I waited for a very long time, and I'm sure that everybody here has too. We wait for certain things. But there are people who look around and they see the successes of other people and they think, oh, I have to do every single thing now. And that's just going to break down their health, and it's going to make them unhappy, and they'll have the crazies.
How do you understand what potential you really have? Do you rely on others to give you that feedback?
I was talking about golfing earlier. That is not one of my potentials. Miniature golfing is as far as I go, and even then I'm pathetic and make everybody feel successful. But we have other potentials. Like I would like to play the piano. I sing. I sing a great deal, and yet I have to pick at which venues I'm going to sing so that I don't spend days and days and weeks and months in rehearsal. And I don't make that one of my ones. I don't turn it into something that's 10, 15 hours a week of time. I try to just scatter that in so it's fun over time. But we really have to learn how to say, I'm going to wait on that for a little while. And then there's other things that we can't wait on. If somebody has little grandchildren, we can't wait for them to grow up to give them their attention. That's the time to be, that's the now. So there are certain things that are nows, and that becomes one of our ones that we select.
You're talking with your own children. How have they been able to take your advice and act upon that?
I have, my youngest son is in all AP classes this year, and I had strongly recommended that he not do more than 2. He wanted to take 4. We settled on 3. One of them is AP Art History. He's not doing well in it right now. What a surprise. It's so much memorization, and he's overloaded, and it's starting to squish out. And I'm trying really hard not to say, I told you so. I'm letting him learn from his experience. With kids, it's almost better if we allow them to fail when the stakes are lower, so that they can learn from that. And then we look at the child and we say, hey, okay, you've dug yourself a hole. How are you going to get yourself out of it? So that we engage their critical thinking and we start them thinking, instead of me giving them a solution, drop it at the semester, or whatever it might be that I was thinking. Make them start to figure it out. You overdid it. You overdid it. And then for my other 2 kids, my oldest son tends to function better more at a 2 than a 3. He does not multitask well. So for him, he needs to focus on one thing at a time, and sometimes even just one. My daughter could rule the world. She could do 3,000 things at once and do them all well. And so her struggle is how to keep it pared down so that she's doing just the things that are going to advance her potentials, to be her highest potentials.
Because in order to get into colleges, we are encouraging them to do many, many things, aren't we? We're saying not only do you have to keep your grades up, but you also have to be involved in your sports teams. You should be doing some service learning work. You should be doing some other voluntary work, whatever it is that you can do so that resume is going to stand out when the college counselors are looking for the best students to enroll. So how do you help them in this very vulnerable time? You know, I hear you make excellent points about focusing on potential and about being able to pare some of your activities down. But I wonder how young people who feel the pressures from outside deal with it.
The parents these days seem to be overloading their kids and have an activity every single day and so forth. It is perfectly okay to do this activity for 3 years and move into the next one. It doesn't have to be all at once. And we're teaching them you don't have to do everything all at once when we model that.
Do you think the school counselors are on your side there? Have you found, I don't know, in your experience, we have a daughter, and I would be giving what I thought was excellent advice, and my husband would give excellent advice, and then we would find out that the school gave different advice. And I often wonder to what extent our voices are drowned out by the...
It depends on the counselor.
By the clamour, yeah.
Yes, that's a big challenge.
That's good. So people who are close to us, and obviously our children are close to us and our parents, but do you find yourself in a role of watching other people burn out or get to a point where they really can't function because they're taking on too much? And do you find yourself having good conversations with them? Is that how you do it?
I see it a lot, and unless a person comes and asks me a question, I don't give the advice. My job is not to be telling other people what to do. The book helps, but unless somebody asks me for advice, I don't jump in.
Because you don't think you'd get a good response, or?
I think that people need to know that they need a change in their lives, and before that time, it's probably not that effective. I work in a public charter school Monday through Thursday. I made an arrangement so that I wouldn't work on Fridays. And I work with kids who've been expelled from everywhere. And some have committed terrible crimes, and many are pregnant and parenting. They've had rough lives. And they're there because they want to make a change for the better. So I take more of a counseling role with my students on an individual basis to help them manage what they're doing. Most of my students are 17, 18, 19, some are 20. And we're not a continuation school, we're not a credit recovery program, we're a fully accredited high school. And so the students come in and sometimes they get jobs, so now they're parenting, they have a job, and they're trying to finish credits of high school, and it's too much. They're overdoing it. Because I contend that children under the age of 5 is a 2. Under the age of 5, it's a 2. So if they have their school and kids under the age of 5, how can they have a job? Then again, how can they help their children grow up and feed their kids? Becomes a big challenge.
Talk a little bit more about how you come to what's a 2 and what's a 1.
It's completely random. I looked at it and I decided that a 1 was anywhere between 10 and 20 hours a week. And the only exception that I made was a full-time job. And I called that a 1 as long as somebody wasn't commuting just terrible hours, because it's hard to call that a 2. And yet for some people, a full-time job may be a 2. I decided not to do fractional numbers like 1.5 and oh, I've got a 3/4 here, because that would encourage people to go, ooh, I've got a 1 3/4, I'm going to put in another item. That takes me up to 2. Okay, now I'm going to add 1 more. That really would put you around 4 things. So any 3 things that you can do well in a certain period of time. Now I have a gal from my prayer group for years who can only manage a 2. And each one of hers is maybe 10 hours. She's a great gal. But she can handle maybe 20 hours worth of stuff a week. The rest of it's just living. She doesn't do extra, and she can't. And she has learned how to say no. But she would just be exhausted and sick all the time. So we sort of have to know ourselves. Some people can run at a 4 regularly. But boy, I've never seen anybody survive at a 5 and be okay. They start to get very uncomfortable.
The ideal then, if I hear you correctly, is to have time. The idea is that if we give up some of those time-consuming activities, then we will garner some very valuable hours to ourselves. Right. So what do you do with those extra hours that you get to yourself?
Read. And if you go on Facebook, you'll see I'm there a lot. And I like to write. For me, I've had to make several choices to say no to a lot of different things that I really want to do. For example, I like public speaking, and my husband and I had to talk it over and decide that the most that I would be gone in any 1 month was 2 days. And so if I had a 4-day event, that would squish 2 months together. So it had to span, because I didn't want to do too much traveling away from the house. When the last kid flies the coop, that might open up a little bit. But I actually like my husband. I like to see him, and I get lonely when he's not there. So unless he wants to travel with me.
Is one way to help people decide, and I'm thinking now about children more than perhaps close friends, but there's a sort of a motivational piece in here in terms of thinking about, well, if you were able to give up some of those responsibilities or those extra things, you would have some time to do things. Now, you talk about learning to play the piano. That would be a highly motivational encouragement to do that. But how do you help your children, again, see that maybe not doing activity is a good thing? What, again, especially for young people, what is the motivator for having time?
Not just to themselves, but with each other as a family unit. Yeah. In my case, I stayed at home until my youngest kid went into 1st grade, and then I taught in the classroom until the oldest entered junior high. And then I stepped out of the classroom to stay home during the 5 years of junior high and high school. And I worked teaching online as a professor. I'd actually gotten my PhD so that I could do that. I was playing chess, trying to arrange the pieces so that I could stay at home during those very critical years. I think if a kid is going to detonate, it starts in junior high. And I didn't want to see that with my own kids. I ended up being like the block mother. We had 15, 20 kids at the house every weekend. I made a lot of spaghetti. And yet I was able to be there, and I was able to make sure they didn't go wrong. But when my daughter graduated high school and my youngest son was doing very well and he was fine, in 2009 I went back into the classroom because it was okay for me then. The kids were fine. They didn't need me in the same way anymore. But I had sacrificed my career. And it was very difficult for me to go back into the classroom because with a PhD, you're not getting hired at a public school. There's no way. So I had to go with the charter school in order to be able to make that dream come true. Next year I'm hoping that we will be able to found a site-based public charter school in San Bernardino. And I'm really excited about it. National University owns our charter, and they've been very supportive.
Well, what do you, as an educator, how do you get this message across? What kinds of activities or what kinds of speaking engagements? Or do you build this into some of your classes? How do you get this?
You mean the idea to my students?
Yes, your students.
I work with my students mostly in very small groups and one-on-one. They're all working, it's very differentiated. They're all in different textbooks, different online classes. Because they can't handle a regular classroom situation, that's why they failed. They weren't good in a 1 to 34 situation when they were changing classes. So they work with me very intensively one-on-one. They just get to hear me lecture and nag them.
If you were to give advice, let's say to a group of pre-service teachers, what advice might you give them in terms of how they might develop their own classrooms to live up to the values that you express in your book?
Went to the University of Redlands for my teaching credential, and on our very last day of class, they gave us parting advice at the end of our program, and they said, do not try to be good at every subject all at once. Instead, pick one item each year and master it. And at the end of each year, you will be the best there is in that subject. You're diving in, that's your one. And then the next year, pick another, and you will build. Otherwise, you're just going to burn out. And it was excellent advice. And I was afraid, so I took it. And it was valuable advice.
In terms of being really good at one and not so good at others, how do you help, again, kids deal with not keeping up with grades in all subjects and things like that? What about the pressure from outside to perform and to keep A's? You know, we hear this lament all the time but in graduate school as well as in undergraduate school, as well as in high school and elementary schools. Students need to be able to show to the outside world that they're doing really well in everything. I don't necessarily think this is a good thing, so it's not something I would like to continue, but I do feel for young people when they are told and when they believe they have to achieve in everything all the time. How do you help them do exactly what you said there, to not worry so much perhaps?
For me, I had to draw a line and say, I believe that 80% or better for a class average is mastery level learning. I didn't set it at 90%. But anytime a class average dropped below 80%, I figured it was my problem, not theirs, that I had mistaught or I had made a mistake. And so I just learned to reteach if a class average is less than 80%. And on an individual basis, if a student is scoring less than 80%, then I would take them and tutor them one-on-one. I started out in elementary school first. So I have taught all subjects in elementary school and before I made the move to high school. And it's very effective because it gives the teacher a really good guideline on what's working and what isn't.
What have you learned from people's reactions to your book?
Most of the people that I speak to about my book are running at a 5, 6, 7, or an 8. They're completely overloaded. And that, by the way, is intentionally why I wrote a short book. I didn't want the book itself to become a life management issue. I wanted it to be crisp and clear and quick and okay, great. And I get emails and letters from people regularly saying, oh my goodness, I feel lighthearted. I was easily able to get rid of 3 things and then 2 things I had to work on, and it took me about 6 months to pare them down. But now I'm at a 3 or a 4, and I'm feeling so much better.
I guess other people in the audience may be wondering, what's next? What's going to be your next building on this?
Well, my next book project is a book called Conundrum Kids, It's a critical thinking book that parents and grandparents can use with their kids. It's very fun. I invented it with my own kids, and my children's they wrote it with me. So it's coming out this month on Amazon, and it'll be on Kindle as well.
Can you talk to us a little bit about it?
Conundrum Kids is, it started with debate. I debated in college, and I really enjoy debate. And so when my kids were driving in the car, instead of just having them play with games and not think, I wanted to develop their critical thinking skills. So I would toss out a scenario to them and say something like, all right, you're walking down the street and you see the neighbor's house is on fire. What are you going to do? Please support your contention. So then they would say what they were going to do, and then they would have to explain why. And then the other kids sitting in the car would have to do a little rebuttal back.
Oh, that's
and then
neat.
they would say what they would do. And sometimes the very first thing they chose was very odd. And I'm thinking, really? Because that is not what a normal person would be doing. So my favorite one was, I did say this one to the kids once driving in the car. A friend of yours gives you a hamster, and you know your mom doesn't want a hamster in the house, so you put it in the closet in a shoebox. What are you going to do now? Keep the hamster. That is what they said, and they had no other solution other than that. So parents can then say to the kid or the grandparent or a teacher who's using it in the classroom, can say, oh, what's another potential solution?
It sounds as if you've got some ideas, perhaps even going forward. Do you see yourself now as perhaps, in terms of your one or major responsibility or passion, is it going to be writing?
My job, my mission is to make sure that I can help kids become responsible citizens, to be productive and to be contributing. But the writing is just, it happens as a result of it. I love writing.
Yes, I can tell.
But it just happens as a byproduct.
That's excellent. I wonder if the audience might like to ask you some questions. If we could invite you to take advantage, I think there'll be some microphones walking around.
You mentioned PhD. Can you not get into public schools? I didn't understand that.
Oh, that's a good question. The question was, why with the PhD would it be difficult to be in a public school? As a principal, I could. But as a teacher, they would rather hire two inexperienced people for the same price that they would have to pay me with union wages. And so even though when I was teaching elementary school, I had the highest test scores in the entire school district, even though I got a 40 percentile increase out of my little inner city kids, and even though they tested at the rate of Beverly Hills and Rancho Palos Verdes kids, that doesn't matter if they're looking at money. And by the way, I would have gone in for less money, but that's not allowed either.
My challenge is that my daughters are doing quite well. My youngest is mechanical engineering at Columbia. My oldest daughter is doing an MBA at University of Michigan. They, unfortunately, which I didn't realize, children do what you do. They don't do what you say.
That's right.
And they don't know how to pull back.
Right.
So I'm kind of stuck with them running around like nuts.
This is so cool.
Trying to do
Christmas is
everything.
coming. You can give them the book. I'll autograph it.
Okay.
Your mommy wants you to have this. Yeah, it's a challenge.
I've
I
told
think
them, they
that
don't stop.
young people today, well, even adult, at any age, people look around and they see so many accomplishments. They want to cram it all in at once. And doing everything at once actually doesn't help that much. It's better. Before the season of the parents, if a kid doesn't have children yet and they want to knock themselves out, go for it. But once they start having the children, then it becomes unfair to somebody else. Then it's the kids that are missing out. So while they're still young, they can maybe learn that it's a lot of work to do a lot of things, and things start to slip, you know. Yeah, it's a challenge, but your kids have done well. All right, questions?
Hi, I'm Cliff Walters, and I'm a physician, and I've also now become an executive coach. And I'm wondering if you've ever had a conversation with your doctor on how to balance life, the chaotic life of a physician.
Well, interestingly, I worked actually for several years at Children's Hospital Los Angeles with research physicians. I worked in hematology, oncology, and so I know what you're talking about. Physicians have hectic lives, and depending upon the area of one's practice, there's a lot of on-call time too. So that's a challenge. It becomes the entire mission. It may very well be that that job is a 3 or a 4, and it's the only thing that the physician can do is that job. Depending upon the type of practice, there's certain things. A dermatologist who's just Botoxing people may be able to leave at a certain hour, and yet somebody who is doing emergency surgeries or maybe a bit more challenging. It's hard to say no, and it is still possible, by the way, for a physician to say no. They do not have to say yes to every single hour. So they can set an hour and say, I'd love to do that, but I cannot, until it comes down to actually saving a life, in which case, sometimes there is a burning yes, and that's one of them. I have burning yeses when I work with my students. There are things that I do. I pick them up, I drive them all over the place because I only drive the girls, by the way, the boys. I take another center person in the car so there's never any impropriety. But if a kid needs to come into school and they can't get there, I will bring them. And that becomes my burning yes. So that's a really good question. Physicians really have picked a high activity career.
Hi, I was just curious what type of advice you give some of the students you're seeing who are maybe average at a number of things and can't figure out what their highest potential should be, and they may have siblings who are just clued in and know, like in your case, you know teaching's your thing, and you just pursue that with a passion. But there's some folks who don't have that.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was shoved into teaching kicking and screaming when I was 34 years old. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that that's what I should really do. And I got very tired of working with burned out physicians who screamed a lot. And so I made the switch myself. And the first day I stepped into the classroom, I went, this is gold. Not everybody, the advice that I would give is not everybody knows right away. It takes some time. So try things out for enough time to know that you either love it or don't like it as much. Some people have the habit of trying something for just a few weeks, and they don't give it a chance. If I had a kid who didn't know what he or she wanted to do, and I do have students who don't know that, I try to question them as we go through the coursework. I try to question them about their interests and their likes. I try to learn about their character and their learning styles, and their multiple intelligences, their various talents. They do come out. Sometimes kids don't know that they're a naturally born leader. They know they've gotten into a lot of trouble, but they don't realize that's because they led a whole bunch of people there. And that's when I can say, you have leadership skills, let's work on that. Okay, now let's get you to be the president of a corporation, or let's get you to lead this group. Let's give you some responsibility so that you can lead in a mature, responsible way instead of, oh my goodness. Yeah, but it takes time, and for some kids, it takes them a while before they figure out what it is that they're good at. That's a good question.
Hello, my name's Kevin Wright, and I'm a health coach. And this is kind of the converse, but for the first time, I have a client who's retired, and so it may not necessarily be the question of what to do. I mean, they may have more than 70 hours. In a case like that, I mean, and like I said, it's my first client in that demographic. What would you say to that? I mean, if it's not the question of, okay, they have too much to do, it's like they have too much time, do they need to find things that to make a 2 or 3 or what would be your advice there?
That's a great question. I actually had to deal with that with my own mother. She's 81, and my father passed on, and she said, well, I'm ready to go now. And I said, Mom, you're really healthy. You can run circles around all of us. You can bench press. You can probably run up Mount Wilson. You're going to be around for a while, so you better come up with something to do. And so she sat down and started thinking about the ways that she could help. Now what she does is she picks up the senior citizens in the area that can't drive any longer, and she takes them to their appointments. And she sits with them for their appointments and keeps them company beforehand. She's a registered nurse, so she can ask the questions. She can also go in and make sure that everything is being done well at the time. Now she's so busy. And my son is moving in with her in Long Beach for college, and she goes, I don't know how I'm going to fit him in. So, Mom, I've got a book for you. She has never purchased my own book. That's because she doesn't know how to use Amazon. I would give her one, but I'm not that nice.
Hi, I wanted to thank you for coming today, and as someone who really loves to read and was inspired by my advanced placement English teacher, who actually was a PhD back in the day when they allowed PhDs, what kind of books have really influenced your philosophy or that you feel you really connect with?
That's a really good question. First of all, if somebody gets a PhD while they're teaching and doesn't change school districts, they're good. It's just if you leave to do it and come back, then you've got an issue. But Anne of Green Gables, the whole series completely influenced me. And the Chronicles of Narnia as well. I have portions of The Horse and His Boy memorized. And I was such a voracious reader when I was a kid. I'd read a book and go, that was a great movie. And then I'd read a book, that was a great movie, because I was seeing them in my head. But the morals in the Anne of Green Gables books are fantastic. I loved The Secret Garden. There's so many children's books, and I still read children's books. I think every adult should be reading children's fiction that's out whole. This is a fabulous book for kids. Teaches excellent morals and values. There's just so many. I actually have a list of books that I like. If anybody ever wants to email me, I can give you my email address, and I have them all the way from 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, all the way up through 12th grade, books that I feel are not only influential academically, but also in a moral and ethical way, and that don't have any what I would consider topics that I wouldn't want my own children to learn about at that time. Yeah.
So you say that you're working now in a charter school that's with underprivileged young adults, and I'm curious, how do you help them sort of get out of their situations if they're single moms and working and trying to finish their high school diplomas? How do you help them move to being able to do all three rather than worrying about which one to drop? Because more than likely, if they're going to drop one, it'll be the high school diploma, which is the thing they need to get out of some of the situations that they're in.
Exactly, and that's what I say. And I also, I literally will go to houses. I speak to them, and I speak to them individually and together. We also have a really great program where they have to do a senior portfolio for their last semester, and they have to research careers, and they have to interview people, and there's all sorts of things that they do in elements, and I teach that class with just the seniors one-on-one instead of having them do it independently, because I've discovered that it keeps them hooked into their education so that they don't drop out on an accident or from fear. A lot of my students have a fear of success. They are so afraid that if they actually succeed at their high school diploma, that they are then going to have to go on and be successful at other things, and they're afraid that they will fail, so if they just choose not to continue, they've never failed. So we talk about that a great deal so that they continue and go on. I love it when my kids go on to college or to trade schools and then college. Not every kid is ready for college the day they step out of high school. Some are ready for a trade school so that they can begin earning money, get themselves stabilized first, and then blossom a little bit later.
Have you considered translating your book to other languages or adjusting it for the differences within our community? There's over 200 languages spoken here.
I do speak Spanish. It's sort of a requirement where I teach. But you're absolutely right. And in terms of cultures, there are many different ways to view things and to see and examine the world. And even with my own students, I'm very cognizant of the fact that my value of X might not be their value that they grew up with, but what we try to do is locate what are our shared values. For example, productivity can be a shared value. And I ask my students, do you want to go on and be a hard worker? And they will say yes. And then once we connect from there, we can move forward. In terms of my book, it would be totally cool to be able, I'd like it published into 47 languages, but maybe one day.
I have one final question for you. I've been career counseling personally myself for several years, and I found that when I've talked to career changers, whether it be at a business school setting or not, or even folks that are starting out their career, there's this sense of, I have to be at a 4 and a 5 during that period of time and say yes to everything. And then maybe they tone it down. Could you kind of speak a little bit to that for any folks that have been through that or might go through that in the future? When should they say yes and then say no? Is there a need to maybe, does that fluctuate through the course of your career?
That is such a good question, and the answer is absolutely yes. There are times when people are going to, if somebody is a brand new attorney and they're working at a high intensity law firm, they're going to have to stay up at a 5 for quite a few years, and that's that. Hopefully they will make that their all for the time and then just do some exercise and things like that to get rid of some of the excess stress. But there are times when people have to do that. Maybe that's not the best time to be running a brand new relationship and launching off with 3 newborns and whatever. Maybe that's not the right time for it. So we have to, if it is at all possible, if somebody's going to pick a career choice that's going to be very busy in the beginning, not to be involved in the other areas of life that will start splitting them up.
Let's give Alisa and Dr. Grogan a hand, nice warm hand for coming out here. I think the message is great, especially during this time of the year with the holidays. I think everyone's going out at 12 right about now, right, for the next 3 weeks or so. So thanks once again.